The ground trembles beneath thousands of marching feet. At first, it sounds like thunder rolling across the earth, but it isn't thunder. It's an army, a Persian army so massive that the horizon itself seems to move. Tens of thousands of soldiers advancing with one purpose: to crush Greece forever. And standing in their path is a line of bronze shields. Just 10,000 Spartans, no mountains to hide behind, no narrow pass like Thermopylae, only an open plain where cavalry can run them down and arrows can fall like rain. A year ago, 300 Spartans died to slow the Persian Empire. Now the empire has come to finish the job. But what the Persians don't yet understand is that this time the Spartans did not march here to die. They marched here for revenge.
1 year earlier, the world had watched something almost impossible. At a narrow mountain pass called Thermopylae, 300 Spartans, led by King Leonidas, stood against the greatest empire on earth. The Persian army was so vast that ancient writers claimed their arrows darkened the sun itself. The Spartans knew they would die, yet they held the pass for days, buying time for the rest of Greece. In the end, they were surrounded, betrayed, slaughtered. But their sacrifice echoed across the Greek world. The Persian king Xerxes marched south anyway. Nothing stood in his path now. Athens, the heart of Greek culture, was abandoned and then burned to the ground. Temples collapsed into ash. Homes turned into blackened ruins. The proud Acropolis became a smoking graveyard of marble and stone. Across Greece, people whispered the same terrifying question. Had the 300 died for nothing? The Persian Empire seemed unstoppable. Its armies stretched across continents. Its wealth was endless. Its kings ruled like gods. And now, Greece looked broken, divided, frightened. Yet behind the fear, something else was growing: anger. Sparta, the most feared military society in the Greek world, had not yet committed its full strength to the war. While Athens burned, the Spartans were doing something that shocked their allies. Instead of marching north, they were building a wall, a literal wall across the Isthmus of Corinth, sealing off their southern homeland. To many Greeks, it looked like cowardice. If the Persians came, Sparta could simply defend its peninsula and let the rest of Greece fall. The man responsible for this decision was not a king like Leonidas. It was his nephew, Pausanias, a regent ruling in the name of a young Spartan prince. He carried the burden of Leonidas's legacy on his shoulders and the weight of an impossible decision: march north and fight the Persians in open battle against an army that might outnumber them 5-1, or protect Sparta and allow the rest of Greece to burn. While Pausanias hesitated, Mardonius was already playing a deadly game. Xerxes had returned to Persia, but he left Mardonius behind with a massive army and one simple command: crush the Greeks. But Mardonius understood something important. Greece was not a single kingdom. It was a fragile alliance of rival cities that often hated each other more than any foreign enemy. So instead of attacking immediately, he tried to break the alliance. His messengers did not ride to Sparta. They rode to the ruins of Athens. There, among the smoking stones of the destroyed city, the Persian offer was delivered: abandon Sparta, join Persia. Mardonius promised that Athens would be rebuilt with Persian gold, its people would live in safety, its power would be restored. All they had to do was betray their Spartan allies. For the Athenians, the temptation was enormous. Their city was gone. Their families were refugees on distant islands. Their allies seemed to be hiding behind a wall. Survival was a powerful argument. But instead of accepting the offer, the Athenians sent a message to Sparta. Not a request, an ultimatum: march north and fight the Persians with us, or we will accept the Persian offer. And when we do, our ships and our armies will join them. Together, we will come south, and Sparta will be destroyed. Suddenly, the war changed. Pausanias was no longer deciding the fate of distant allies.
He was deciding the survival of Sparta itself. That night, without speeches, without public declarations, the decision was made. Sparta would march to war. Orders spread silently through the city. Spartan citizens prepared their armor. Bronze shields were polished. Spears were lifted from racks. Allied soldiers gathered from across the Peloponnese. It would be the largest army Sparta had ever assembled. 10,000 Spartan hoplites formed the steel core. Around them marched tens of thousands of allied Greeks. Under cover of darkness, the army began moving north. No celebrations, no cheers, only the steady rhythm of thousands of sandals striking the road. The next morning, when the Athenian envoys returned demanding an answer, a Spartan official finally spoke. "Our army is already marching." And somewhere on the long road toward central Greece, 10,000 Spartans were already on their way to face the empire that had killed their king. They were not marching just to save Greece. They were marching to avenge Thermopylae.
When Pausanias finally reached the plains near a small town called Plataea, the scale of the coming battle became painfully clear. Across the river stretched an ocean of tents and banners. Persians, Medes, Bactrians, Indians, soldiers from every corner of the Persian Empire. Some had come willingly, others had been forced to fight. Among them were even Greeks from cities that believed Persia would inevitably win. At the center of it all stood the man who commanded them, Mardonius. He was confident, even pleased. The Spartans had finally come out into the open. No narrow mountain pass, no rocky terrain to neutralize cavalry, only a wide plain, perfect for the strength of the Persian army. This was exactly the battlefield he wanted. Mardonius placed his forces carefully along the banks of the Asopus River and built a massive fortified camp behind them, a wooden fortress large enough to hold his enormous army. His cavalry, fast, mobile, deadly, would dominate the open ground. His archers would rain arrows from a distance. If the Greeks crossed the river to attack, they would be cut down before they could even reach the Persian lines. Pausanias saw the trap immediately. Charging straight across the plain would mean annihilation. Even the famous Spartan phalanx could not survive being surrounded by cavalry and arrows in open terrain. So the Greeks did something unexpected. They waited. Instead of advancing, the army climbed onto the nearby hills overlooking the plain. From there, their heavy infantry could defend themselves more easily, protected from cavalry charges. It was a cautious position, but it kept them alive. And so began one of the most tense standoffs in ancient history. Two massive armies sat only a few kilometers apart. Day after day, neither side moved. The sun rose over both camps. Soldiers sharpened weapons. Shields glinted in the heat. The smell of thousands of men, animals, and cooking fires filled the air. And every day, Persian cavalry rode close to the Greek lines. Their commander was a giant of a man named Mecistius. He rode a magnificent horse decorated with golden armor, a warrior who had built his reputation across countless battles. His task was simple: break the Greeks psychologically before the real battle even began. His riders galloped close to the hills, loosing arrows and shouting insults. "Where are the brave Spartans now?" they mocked. "Your king died at Thermopylae. Will you hide here forever?" Arrows struck shields. Dust rose beneath hooves. Greek soldiers watched in silence as the cavalry rode circles around them. Pausanias refused to take the bait. He knew that if even one unit of hoplites broke formation to chase the riders, they would be isolated and destroyed. Discipline held the line, but the tension grew worse with every passing day. Finally, on the 8th day, Mardonius decided to escalate. Instead of harassment, he ordered a real attack. The Persian cavalry thundered toward the weakest part of the Greek line, the Athenians stationed on lower ground. Thousands of riders slammed into their formation. Horses crashed against shields. Riders hurled javelins downward from above. Archers fired volleys of arrows into the crowded ranks. The Athenians fought bravely, but cavalry had the advantage. Their formation began to buckle. Men fell. Shields splintered. Panic crept through the line. If the Athenians broke, the entire Greek army would collapse. A desperate messenger ran through the chaos toward Pausanias, dodging arrows and galloping horses. "We cannot hold," he shouted. "If help does not come, we are finished." Pausanias watched the disaster unfold from the hills. His Spartans stood ready, eager to charge. But if he moved his main force down into the open plain, Mardonius would unleash the full Persian army. It would be the end. Then, in the middle of the chaos, something extraordinary happened. A small group of Greek hoplites, only 300 men from the city of Megara, made a desperate decision. They charged. Not a perfect formation, not a carefully planned maneuver, just 300 warriors running downhill into a storm of cavalry, screaming their war cries. The sudden attack surprised the Persians. Riders wheeled around to face the new threat. In the confusion, arrows flew from both sides. One of those arrows found an unbelievable target. It struck the horse of Mecisteus. The magnificent animal reared in pain and threw its rider violently into the dirt. The giant Persian commander hit the ground in a crash of armor and dust. For a moment, the battlefield froze. Mecisteus tried to stand, but his heavy golden armor weighed him down. Greek soldiers rushed toward him, stabbing at the joints of his armor. Spears struck his chest, but the metal held. Finally, an Athenian soldier drove his spear through the visor of the Persian's helmet, piercing straight through his eye. The great Persian cavalry commander collapsed, dead in the mud. When the Persian riders saw their leader fall, discipline shattered. Instead of continuing the attack, they rushed toward the body, desperate to recover it. What followed was chaos. Greeks and Persians fought over the corpse like wolves over prey. Shields slammed together, daggers flashed, men stabbed blindly in the mud. Blood soaked the ground beneath dozens of struggling soldiers. Slowly, the heavier Greek hoplites pushed forward. At last, they seized the body of Mecisteus. Forming a shield wall around their prize, they dragged it back toward the hills. The Persian cavalry withdrew. That night, the Greeks celebrated their small but important victory. Mecisteus had been one of the Persian army's most respected commanders. His death proved that the invaders were not invincible. But in the Persian camp, the mood was very different. Mardonius was furious. Provocation had failed. His best cavalry commander was dead, and the Greeks still refused to come down from the hills. If he could not break them with fear, he would break them with hunger. The next phase of the battle would not be fought with swords. It would be fought with thirst.
Mardonius changed his strategy overnight. No more reckless cavalry charges, no more insults shouted across the hills. Instead, he aimed at the Greek army's weakest point, its lifeline: supply. His riders began sweeping across the countryside in wide circles, hunting the Greek supply convoys that were bringing food and wine from the Peloponnese. Wagons were burned, escorts were slaughtered. Slowly, the Greek camp began to feel the first bite of hunger. But food was only part of the problem. Water was far more dangerous. The Persians controlled the nearby river. The only reliable source of fresh water for the Greek army was a single spring in the hills known as Gargathia. It was small, barely more than a stream, but it was enough to keep tens of thousands of men alive. Mardonius ordered his cavalry to make sure that would not last. Persian riders began attacking the spring constantly. Archers galloped past it, firing arrows at anyone who tried to fill a water skin. Greek soldiers had to escort the water carriers in armed groups just to bring a few precious buckets back to camp. Every trip to the spring became a gamble with death. Days passed. The Greek army grew weaker. Men were thirsty, exhausted, and frustrated. The smell of the crowded camp became unbearable under the hot sun. Morale, which had risen after the death of Mecisteus, now collapsed again. Pausanias realized the truth. If they stayed on the hills, they would die slowly. If they attacked across the plain, they would die quickly. There was only one remaining option. They had to move. Late one night, the Greek commanders gathered in Pausanias' tent. The torches flickered across tired faces as the Spartan regent explained the plan. The army would withdraw under cover of darkness and move toward a safer position near Plataea, called the Island, where two rivers would provide water and protection. It was not a retreat, Pausanias insisted. It was a tactical repositioning. But for Spartans, the word retreat tasted like poison. Order spread quietly through the camp. At midnight, the army began to move, and almost immediately, everything went wrong. The Greek army was not a single united force. It was a coalition of rival cities, each with its own commanders and fears. In the darkness, confusion spread quickly. Some units began marching too early, others hesitated. Corinthian and Megarian troops in the center panicked and rushed toward Plataea faster than planned, disappearing into the night. On the left flank, the Athenians refused to move until they were certain the Spartans were moving too. But the greatest crisis exploded inside the Spartan camp itself. A Spartan captain named Ammopharatus refused to obey the order. He stood before Pausanias and declared that Spartan law forbade retreat. Leonidas had died rather than step backward, and he would do the same. Pausanias tried to reason with him. This is not retreat, it is survival. But Ammopharatus would not move. Finally, in a moment that shocked everyone, the captain picked up a large rock and dropped it at Pausanias' feet. He said, "This is my vote. I vote to stay and fight." Time was running out. Dawn was approaching. Pausanias made a brutal decision. The Spartan army would move without him. If Ammopharatus truly had Spartan honor, he would follow. So the main Spartan force began withdrawing across the plain, leaving one stubborn unit behind. By dawn, the Greek army was scattered across the landscape, and that was exactly when the Persian scouts noticed something strange. The hills were empty. Mardonius stepped outside his tent and looked across the plain. What he saw made him laugh. He did not see an organized maneuver. He saw chaos. Groups of Greek soldiers marching in different directions. Spartans moving slowly toward the foothills. Athenians separated on the far side. Units out of formation. To Mardonius, it looked like a broken army fleeing in panic. His pride made the decision instantly. "Attack," he ordered. The Persian army surged forward like a tidal wave. Cavalry crossed the river first, galloping toward the scattered Spartans. Arrows filled the sky. Thousands of missiles rained down on the withdrawing soldiers. Spartan shields raised. Men fell as arrows pierced exposed joints in their armor. Behind the cavalry came the Persian infantry, the immortals, the elite guard of the empire. Pausanias saw the disaster unfolding. The retreat was over. Now they had to stand and fight. Amid the rain of arrows, he ordered the Spartans to form their line. But even then, he hesitated. Spartan tradition demanded that no battle begin without favorable omens from the gods.
So, in the middle of chaos, with arrows striking shields and men dying all around him, Pausanias turned to the army priest. "Perform the sacrifice." A sheep was killed. The priest examined its entrails. Unfavorable. Another sacrifice. Again, the answer was the same. Unfavorable. The Persian army was already closing in. Their soldiers were only meters away. Spears and swords were raised. Still, the Spartans waited. Finally, Pausanias lifted his hands toward the sky and shouted to the gods, "Do not abandon Greece!" At that exact moment, after a third sacrifice, the priest shouted the words every Spartan had been waiting for. "The omens are favorable." The transformation was instant. The Spartan line lowered its spears. The bronze wall advanced. 10,000 warriors moved forward as one unstoppable machine. The collision between the armies sounded like thunder. Persian wicker shields shattered against solid bronze. Spartan spears, nearly 3 meters long, pierced through linen armor with terrifying ease. Men fell by the dozens as the phalanx pushed forward step by relentless step. For the Persians, it became a nightmare. Their numbers trapped them. Soldiers behind continued pushing forward, unaware of the slaughter ahead. Bodies piled up as the Spartan line advanced like a grinding wall of steel. Watching the disaster unfold, Mardonius realized the truth. If the Spartans held their ground, the battle was lost. So he gathered his personal cavalry guard and charged directly into the Spartan line. It was a desperate gamble. His horse thundered forward, scimitar flashing as he cut through the chaos, searching for the Spartan commander. And then one man saw him, a Spartan named Arimnestus. He had no spear long enough to reach the mounted general. The battle surged around him in a storm of dust and blood. So Arimnestus did the simplest thing possible. He picked up a rock. With all his strength, he hurled it at the Persian commander. The stone struck Mardonius in the head. For a moment, the general sat frozen in his saddle. Then he collapsed to the ground. The effect was instant. Across the battlefield, Persian soldiers saw their leader fall. The riderless white horse ran through the dust, and suddenly the unstoppable army began to panic. The immortals broke first. Then the rest followed. What had been a roaring invasion turned into a terrified stampede. The Spartans saw the collapse, and the hunters were unleashed. They dropped their long spears and drew their short swords, chasing the fleeing soldiers across the plain. Men were cut down at the riverbanks, trampled in the water, or stabbed as they tried to climb the walls of the Persian camp. Thousands crowded inside the wooden fortress, believing they were safe. But soon the Greek army surrounded it. The Spartans could not break the walls, but the Athenians could. Axes struck the wooden gates again and again until the massive doors finally cracked open. When the gate collapsed, the Spartans surged inside. What followed was slaughter. The massive Persian camp became a maze of tents and wagons, where terrified soldiers had nowhere to run. Spartan blades struck with brutal precision, while Athenian warriors fought with burning fury for their destroyed city. By sunset, the Persian army had ceased to exist. Out of hundreds of thousands, only a few tens of thousands managed to escape. The rest lay scattered across the fields of Plataea. Later, when Mardonius's body was brought before him, Pausanias was offered a chance for revenge. The Persians had once mutilated the king of Leonidas. He could do the same, but Pausanias refused. "That," he said calmly, "is the behavior of barbarians." Instead, the Persian commander was buried with military honors, because the real revenge for Thermopylae had never been mutilation. It had been victory, and on that blood-soaked plain, 10,000 Spartans had finally delivered it.